Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 57 being recorded on October 25th, 2022. With me in the chat are about 3 dozen people, and for this live stream, this isn't going to be, I don't have like a mountain of content that I want to get to. I really just kind of screenshotted 2 articles, and this might be a shorter one, and we might just chat. I really crammed in a lot of content last week. And later in the week, I do plan to stream again. Over the weekend, I found so much COVID related content that is genuinely worth covering. Um, there's a lot happening on the COVID research front, particularly about long COVID and the risk of death. People experiencing sudden death, a year after having COVID and things like that. There is some pretty serious stuff going on with that, but just all kinds of COVID stuff actually worth covering. We might do actually 2 streams on that this week. I don't have a lot of other, that's one of the things that we do most often here at the channel. That obviously the audiobooks, various pieces of commentary and things like that. But we have a strong thread going on COVID research. Pretty much everyone else has dropped the ball. There are various, doctors, epidemiologists, public health people, biologists, whatever, who are continuing to put out research on COVID after the capitalists have decided that it's just no longer worth covering. And so, yeah, I just today was not in a place to be screenshotting tons of stuff and preparing all the content and thinking about ways to link it together. So that's going to have to wait at least till tomorrow. But anyway, we have what we have today. Basically, I plan to. There was an interesting thread I read that was some economic analysis of late stage capitalism based on the work of Henryk Grossman. So it is what it is. I'm definitely looking for feedback on this one. I'm really putting this out there to generate discussion more than anything else. I thought it was a really interesting thread that can lend itself to various interpretations. I'll share my interpretation of it. But I thought, there's a lot done on the sort of, quote, geopolitics side of things or political analysis. There's not always as much actual Marxist economic analysis going on. And this was some of it. And I wanted to share it because I think that this is, it's important to return to those economic roots of this. I mean, we can see it play out in politics, and you can kind of approach the whole subject from the political side and the historical side in that sense as well. But there aren't as many people doing the economic analyses, and it is important to do, critical, really. So, yeah, I did want to share that, and we'll get the ball rolling. And I think that probably as we read through Marx's Capital, which will be coming up soon in the basic Marxism-Leninism study guide. That's a playlist if you go to the home tab or the playlists tab at the channel. You can find the basic Marxism-Leninism study guide. And we are currently working on, I think it's number 20 or 21 in that list out of 26, so we're near the end, which is Engels' Anti-Düring Part 1. I've recorded up through Chapter 5. There are 12 chapters. I'll be finishing that and then posting Anti-Düring Part 1. There are 3 parts. We already have Part 3, I think, up on the channel. We'll be posting that in one long 3 or 4 hour video after all the chapters have been uploaded individually, so keep an eye out for that. After that, it's some shorter works, Ludwig Feuerbach and the end of however the rest of that title goes, and then Theses on Feuerbach, which I tried to do. Wow, that was really stupid. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but you really have to read the longer work on Feuerbach to get the theses on Feuerbach. Trying to read the theses, it doesn't say a lot in and of itself. So we'll be redoing that. And then I believe value, price, and profit is next, and then we'll be doing capital. And we'll be doing Engels' synopsis of capital and things like that. So we'll be getting a lot more into the economic side of things. This is a far cry from the kind of like, somebody said something bad about the USA, therefore it's Marxist. No, we got to, learn the basic skills and, have people trained in what to look at when it comes to economics and analysis of production and things like that. So we're going to get into that soon. It'll definitely be before the end of the year now that I've actually gotten back into anti-during, which is a great work. There was just a lot of other stuff I wanted to cover. And anyway, uploading it chapter by chapter seems to be working pretty well for getting through it. So let's see what we have in the chat. You know what? Actually, before we get to the chat, what's new on the channel? Let's do that first. And while we're thinking of various pieces of housekeeping, let's thank the patrons whose names are on the screen. Patreon.com/socialismforall is the place where you can get your name on the screen. $2 a month or more, whatever you see fit. I don't run ads on the channel or do sponsorships or anything like that. So really is just patron supported. If you feel like kicking in some money, that's great. There's been a lot of long running support. Names in green have been going for 2 years. Names in yellow have been going for over a year. So anyway, thanks to everybody for pitching in. I would make content even if nobody supported, but the support allows me to spend a lot more time on it than I'd be able to do otherwise. So as far as what's new at the channel, I've had a couple of community posts. So yeah, there was this one, the Lynch elaborate on that meme. Somebody didn't know who this was. This is David Lynch, a director. Kind of a American absurdist director or surrealist movie director and painter. People may not know David Lynch. Started out as a painter and actually has kind of gone back to painting rather than making movies, which is somewhat unfortunate, but because I like the movies. But anyway, you know, if you like paintings, he's doing that instead. But yeah, it was Second Chances Day at Socialism for All recently. What does that mean? Well, a lot of people got unbanned, but that may not last for everyone, depending on how it goes. But, you know, I'd worked up a decent ban list in the last 2.5 years, and let me stress, not everybody got unbanned. But a lot of people got a second chance, and I did switch to a different system of moderation on the comments for some of the videos. Specifically, a lot of the videos are now, comments are approved individually. So you can look at it almost as everyone is banned, but, you know, I can approve comments individually. Well, you know, it's not entirely that, because when people are banned, I don't even see their comments anymore. But anyway, a lot of people got let out because, you know, maybe you got banned 2 years ago and you've learned how to behave yourself in the interim. So we'll give that another chance. I don't know if there's going to be Third Chances Day, so if you get banned twice, assume if you get banned twice that you may not be let back in. But anyway, also approving comments individually, it lets me see, you know, the YouTube system, it shows me when a new comment is made that is a top level comment, but I don't always see replies. So this actually lets me just stay a bit more engaged with what is going on in conversations as far as replies and things like that. Your comment may or may not be published, but if one of your comments is not published, it doesn't mean that you're blocked necessarily. It means primarily that I didn't publish that particular comment. So hopefully that's clear. You know, out of over 10,000 people, there were about 500 and something on the banned list. So that's not too bad. And yeah, again, hopefully there were some people who, you know, were just obvious either trolls or just people who, you know, have their own outfit, which is like Pat Sock or something like that. I didn't necessarily let those people back in because I don't feel like reading their garbage. You know, running a channel like this, it really takes a lot of time and effort. And I need to do what I need to do to keep the channel rolling forward and getting these resources out to people. And if that means that, you know, I need to not be hearing bullshit from certain people, and you might not think it's bullshit, but if I do, that's really what matters because I'm the one actually having to do the work of running the channel, then you know, it might just be that for the greater good of continuing the channel on, I need to not read your comments. So it is what it is. And you know, sometimes people will write to me and say, hey, you banned me or blocked me or whatever, can you undo that? And, you know, sometimes, yes, it depends on the situation. So, but, you know, the thing for me is like, especially on something like Twitter, there's so much garbage on that site that there's a lot of times if somebody posts something sufficiently where I just block, I don't mute because it's better that way. You can't see them, they can't see you. Everybody just goes in their own direction. And blocks are not necessarily permanent, but if you start squawking about them, they definitely can become that way. What else did we have? Oh yeah, so new things at the channel. Well, that's really big. I finally got into the recommended channels feature, and god damn, that's big. There we go. Still got to figure this out, and I did not remember to spend any time on that. But this is now what the channels tab looks like at S4A. I put up a round of a dozen other channels. People sometimes ask, what are other channels that I think are worth listening to? And this is what the channels tab now looks like, absent, of course, the customized channel buttons that, you wouldn't be seeing. So what do we have up there? Bestie Marks. Bestie Marks has a large Twitter account, up around 75,000 followers, recently started a YouTube, and the YouTube is very good. They are from Europe somewhere. I don't know if it's Italy or what. They've done a lot of videos on it. They've done videos on both Italy and Germany, specifically around the rise of fascism. Kind of in both cases, one of the videos is about the betrayal of the German Revolution in 3 parts. There's also a 3-part series on, what's it on? Why Green Capitalism is a Lie, and then some recent videos on Italian fascism. So I think they have 9 videos up so far, but they're high quality, good Twitter account, good YouTube account so far. And we have a bit of, we'll DM and stuff. So these are people either have some kind of relationship with, or I think that they're similar channels and things like that. So yeah. Who's next? Fellow Traveler is another, my channel was small and his channel was small around the same time. And he runs a Discord, and there's a lot of people who are very active commenters, watch the smaller channels, stuff like that, and are pretty active in Fellow Traveler's world, and sort of I think there's a lot of overlap with like Jason Unruh and sort of that whole world. But anyway, one of my first response videos ever was to a Fellow Traveler video, and I largely agreed with what he was saying in that video. It was actually recommended by somebody. I remember this pretty clearly, actually. This is back when S4A still had a Facebook page, and somebody was like, I'm from Sweden, and this and that, and can you respond to this Fellow Traveler video? And anyway, that was a while ago. That was 2.5 years ago. I knew a lot less then than I do now. But anyway, yeah. Trav is somebody who works hard, does streams, puts together videos, and so anyway, linked there. Which again, I see Trav's channel as kind of a portal to the sort of Marxist-Leninist YouTube underground, as it were, between the sort of the Discord and the network of smaller channels of people under, 2,000-3,000 or even 1,000 subs. But there's tons of people putting content out who do regularly stream. They haven't broken through maybe 1,000 or 2,000 subscribers yet, but there's a whole mycelial layer of small Marxist and Marxist-Leninist channels and Maoist channels that, again, I think Trav is kind of one of the bigger ones of those, and you can find a lot of the people who do that kind of smaller channel stuff in his comment section. Next, the Finnish Bolshevik, of course, has been around for kind of a long time, like first generation Marxist-Leninist YouTubers. Some people, will take issue with sort of the, hardline Stalin defense. Of course, that's one of the more divisive issues in the Marxist world generally. But, they've been doing their content for a long time, and they also run a channel down and to the left, Marxist-Leninist Theory, which is audiobooks. So definitely there's, I think, a lot of similarity between S4A and Finball's 2 channels. Finnish Bolshevik also puts together, 20 to 40 minute videos on various topics, which are very interesting. I think that they have a nose for some really interesting subjects, and again, worth checking out and worth being familiar with. The next two channels there, Luna Oi and Luna Oi Live. Probably many of you will know Luna Oi. If you don't, you should. She is a Vietnamese communist who is doing a lot of great work to popularize content from an international communist perspective to people in the insular imperial core. And she gets a lot of shit for it, but I think her content is really good. I think her attitude is good. I think her taste in general, like the style of the channel. She's done cooking videos. She does a lot of like cultural stuff. She does theory. She does politics, and she does live streams regularly, along with Non-Compete, who she's in a relationship with and is more of an anarchist. But yeah, so anyway, a lot of good content there. If you're not familiar with, I think deserves a look. Next, Marxist Paul, also overlapped there with Paul Connolly, does video essays, about one or two a month, and they're pretty good. So if you're looking for sort of, Marxist answers on a particular topic, Paul's channel is a good place to start. He does live streams sometimes too, with guests like, Hakeem and other people from within the Marxist social media world. So a good channel worth knowing about. Actually, I also have to thank Paul because some of the channels here, Paul was kind of working on putting people in touch, different channels, and it was through that effort that I started paying more attention to some of the people on here. So actually, one of those people is the Marxist Project. So again, if they've been going for years as well. And if you're looking for sort of Marxist answers on a particular topic, they have a lot of pretty high quality videos, either on Marxist theory or subjects like, a lot of people talking about the Ukrainian Nazi issue, which has been exploited by imperialist Russia for, war propaganda purposes. But even prior to that, they did a video on that, which was fairly objective, I thought. So Marxist Project. And again, none of these are super huge channels. I think that the biggest one is Luna with 27,000. So we're all sort of under that 100,000, and many of us more in the 50,000 or under bracket. So you may not know these channels, and that's kind of the point too. Moving along, Politsturm. So that's Politsturm International's channel. They also have another channel which is not in English, which has 50,000 subscribers. This one's closer to 10,000, close to the size of S4A right now. And you may have seen on the community tab this week, I linked one of their videos, Is Russia Imperialist? This was a 19.5-minute video that I think was just solid from start to finish for anybody looking for answers on this. And I saw a lot of people, both on Twitter and on YouTube, trying to argue in response, like underneath this post, whether it was my post or whether it was Politsturm's post on Twitter about this, people dropping in trying to be like, no, Russia's not imperialist because they're fighting an anti-imperialist war against the United States. That's not how it works. And honestly, it just shows you didn't watch the video, because we have a specific definition of imperialism in Marxism, and you need to kind of, if you want to call yourself a Marxist, go by that definition. And they did, and they produced a very good video, as have other channels such as the next one, Prolcult or Prolcult, depending on your pronunciation preferences. They do video essays, again, about one a month thereabouts, including various things on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, on coming food shortages, crises of capitalism, and I will also want to give major points to both Politsturm and Prolcult for using really good stock footage. Sometimes people get a bit haphazard with the stock footage that they use in their videos. They use really on-point visuals, and I think it's really worth supporting channels who do that. I mean, obviously, the quality of the analysis and the content on that level is key, but they definitely go the extra mile and use excellent visuals as well. Something I can't be bothered to do, but my style is a little different. I don't do the once a month video essay thing. That's just not. I'm not really like a videographer, in case you haven't noticed. I'm just more of a talker. So, yeah. And then finally, the Red Army, which has a small YouTube channel, which may be growing soon, but is bigger on Twitch. And it's kind of been on again, off again, but they also read theory and they do discussion streams and things like that. And that is a run in part by a Twitter comrade, Sal, um, who who is a comrade who I think has good taste and good judgment. Also, recently started the Thin Blue Lies podcast, which I believe will be showing up on the Red Army YouTube channel. They're on their second episode. I think they've published 2 episodes so far, just started a couple months ago. And I've been invited to appear on Thin Blue Lies, which is basically it's a true crime podcast, but specifically just about the crimes of the police, which I think is an excellent concept. So anyway, there may be more people linked in the future, but I wanted to just start off with people who, again, I think are just solid and or, at least have messaged with a little bit. And but I think that this is a good start. And you're going to find other channels just going off of those. I will also thank Finball for linking to S4A in the first place. So this is in part a link back on that. But anyway, that's, exciting. Now that S4A is up over 10,000, I really haven't been doing guest appearances and things like that. And I did definitely want to build S4A into, see if this thing had legs on its own before just, going, somebody, I didn't want people just being like, oh, you're just chasing clout, just trying to get into so-and-so's orbit or whatever. That's not really what it's about. I do this because I can't not do this. I have been fairly obsessed with politics and social change and mass movements and the need for revolution for a while, need for radical social change for a while. And I can't not do this, and that's why I do it. And, now S4A is up over 10,000. People are actually listening to some extent. And, I figured it was time to reach out to some other people whose work I have noticed and think is, if you like S4A, you should probably look at these other channels too. All right, so that is kind of the rundown on there. I think that that's about everything that I wanted to mention. There's 3 new audiobooks up on the channel, including Lenin on electoral politics, Before You Fall for... Actually, you know what I have? I think I just picked up somebody... There's an old... Here it is. CPUSA cartoon. There was like an anti-revisionist group. This comic is from 1986, making fun of CPUSA then. And there's 2 posters on the wall. One says Vote Democrat, The People's Choice. It's a fox wearing a tie with a $sign on it, Frank Fox. And then there's William Wolfe wearing the exact same outfit. It says Vote Republican. And then somebody in a suit with a CPUSA button saying, why it's easy to see why you should vote for the fox, smaller teeth. And then little, are those possums? What are those at the bottom? Something stinks around here, and there's flies and stink lines coming off of CPUSA. And they've been doing this for a long time. This opportunism needs to be fought. And I understand that there's a big influx of people, rank and file, low-level members now. The leadership of that party seems to be broken, and I don't know if it can be fixed. But people who have recently joined the party, be aware this is kind of like a running issue where nobody at the ground level, or very few people at the ground level, many of whom listen to S4A, I talk to you, in various capacities and messages or comments or chat or whatever, and nobody really agrees with this, but it's consistently been coming out of CPUSA at the higher levels for some time. Sometimes these people get jobs in various Democratic administrations, in the progressive wing of different Democratic Party administrations. This is obviously not, there's one thing when you want to get the best conditions for class struggle that you can get. And then you have to actually advocate for, revolution and actually doing the class struggle part, rather than just chasing conditions over and over again. I think it should be clear at this point that, we're 40 years into neoliberalism, maybe 45, depending on how you're starting the count. Things are getting steadily worse no matter who's in charge, Democrat or Republican. And, I know people do the like tactical Democrat voting. Even if you do that, and I'm not really necessarily recommending that, but even if you do that, you have to agree that if we do not build something other than the Democratic Party, we're fucked. Because no matter how many times the Democrats get into power, things still get worse. And we need them to stop getting worse. So we need to do something else. So we must build parties that are not Democrat tailing. We need to build parties that are going to fight capitalism in all of its manifestations, whether it's Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or other. Hence I made videos and posts on the need for a left coalition, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But so we addressed some of that in the most recent video, audiobook that's up on the channel, The Attitude of the Bourgeois Parties and of the Proletarian Party towards the Duma elections. This was, of course, over 100 years ago. Some things don't change that much, though, in capitalism. A lot of the basic class interests are the same, and, a lot of the politics wind up being the same for that reason. All right, so we are about 26 minutes in. Let's go to the chat and chat with the chat for a while before we get into some of that material that I was talking about earlier. A couple of people are at party meetings or having a union meeting later. There you go. Some talk about COVID. My grandpa had a fall the other night, so we had to go into the hospital to check on him. And my dad took his mask off at every chance he could. He has a bad cough right now as well. He's tested COVID negative, though. Well, let me add, if you want to test for COVID with a rapid test, I don't know if you had a PCR, which are much more accurate, or a rapid test. But when you do the rapid test, swab the back of your throat, swab the inside of your cheeks, and swab deep in your nose, not just the outer nostril. Because there have been experiments run where when people actually swab back of the throat and cheeks and deep up in the nose, it's much more likely to not give you a false negative. If you have COVID, it's much more likely to detect that, so do that. But regardless, whatever your dad has that's stupid and irresponsible. Next comment, but I am still in my rooms with 100 people and no masks worn by anyone except me, and my hands are still in pain. Yeah, we are really headed for a shitstorm, and again, we'll be covering a lot more COVID stuff this week. Rochelle Walensky, the head of the CDC, got shredded recently on social media for making a post about, we're headed into the fall, and there's all kinds of respiratory viruses going around, and then recommended hand washing, but not masks. Didn't mention masks, and she wasn't out of characters, as many people showed. Got shredded. Every single comment was like, are you allergic to recommending masks? And then, irony of ironies, she got fucking COVID. Big surprise. So, live by COVID denial, die by COVID denial. And, COVID may or may not kill you on the first round. Every time you get reinfected, it's upping your odds of serious health crises and potentially aging major organs like your brain, your kidneys, by years at a stretch. So every time you get COVID, it could be taking 3 or 4 or more years off of your life. Like, we don't know long term. We will know 10 or 15 years from now. In the short term, we know that there have been some sudden death illnesses long after the acute period of COVID was over, that first month where people usually get hospitalized. But we've covered this before. There was a population study out of, I think, Estonia, where they did a database of like 120,000 people. Maybe it was even more than that. But it was a large group of people. And people who had COVID, much more likely to die within the next 12 months. So it doesn't always kill you right away. And again, the article about COVID and brain shrinkage, it causes aging in organs like the brain equivalent to roughly like a decade of natural aging. You don't want that. Okay, you want to be pursuing good health and low inflammation and other things that are signs of good health. You don't want to be just catching this virus 2 or 3 times a year, which is going to be taking big chunks out of your lifespan. This is a real thing. It's not a game. So yeah, masks. Wear an N95, wear a KN95, wear, KN94. You want something with high filtration. P100s, which are available both in disposable and non-disposable forms. Those are kind of the gold standard. They filter 100% or really close to it of particulates, including viruses. And if you wear them, you're far, 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 far less likely to get sick because it's going to get filtered out. Then also, after you're done wearing the mask, don't handle the outside of the mask because it's got all the stuff that it filtered out on the outside of the mask. So you want to be careful of that. But this is how it works. There's no excuse for not knowing the science at this point. I mean, yes, the media is misleading people greatly and downplaying the threat of COVID. After being really strict last year, 2021, people would get kicked off of social media for criticizing this and that. And then now, the major platforms are condoning the same kind of statements that they were kicking people off for a year ago. So you see, the science is, embraced when it's convenient, and then as soon as it isn't, they get rid of it. Profit always is the first priority in capitalism. Science gets constrained by that. Science always takes a back seat to the need for chasing short-term profit, and that's exactly what's going on right now. Biden killed the collective pandemic response in the United States. And he came in under the guise of, we're the pro-science party, and we're going to take the pandemic seriously, and hundreds of thousands of people died under Trump. Well, just as many died in the next year. So just as many died under Biden. They want to blame that just on unvaccinated people. And it's true that there's no reason for most people not to be vaccinated. Talk to your healthcare provider if you have one. But I mean, for most people, there's no reason not to get vaccinated. It's very true that if you're not vaccinated, you're much more likely to have some of the worst health outcomes, up to and including hospitalization and death. Your odds of getting long COVID are much higher. The organ damage you're going to sustain is probably going to be much higher. But that said, the vaccine is the last line of defense against COVID, or one of the last lines. Other things like monoclonal antibodies. But the point is, there should be many lines of defense prior to infection that are intended solely to just prevent infection. It's things like ventilation, filtration, social distancing, masking with things like KN95s or N95s, masks that actually work, not just cloth, or surgical masks, which are not airtight. Quarantining, isolation, weekly testing in schools and workplaces as a matter of course. And then, targeted shutdowns. So Japan's a good example, and we'll cover this probably more next week. Japan didn't have nearly as much fatality out of COVID, and they didn't really do lockdowns. They did do a lot more masking because it's just not an issue in their country. It's not this heavily politicized thing. People aren't throwing huge tantrums calling the masks face diapers and all kinds of stuff. Like, there's a fucking serious airborne virus. Wear a mask. So anyway, masks make an enormous difference. There's other studies showing, looking at different school systems in the United States, school systems that required masks and school systems that didn't. Not surprisingly, the ones that required masks did much better. They had lower incidence of illness. But anyway, Biden just wants to blame people who didn't get vaccinated. And not getting vaccinated against COVID is a stupid thing to do. For most people, if you're not in a position where you really medically cannot get it. But yeah, I mean, the N95 and all these other things that need to be done on a society-wide level, Biden has completely been shitting on those. It started with Mask or Vax in May 2021, and it went from there. They've just been steadily eroding it. And it's not just the U.S., many other European countries, other capitalist countries have been doing the same thing. But the U.S. has been going right along with it. It's a very bad example of it's what not to do in a pandemic, specifically one that's airborne. Okay. And I was going to say, I've mentioned Project N95 before as a place that people can get high-quality masks. That remains true. However, find some of the brands that they're selling and go somewhere else, because I went to actually restock on some masks for this upcoming, what is probably going to be a horrendous airborne virus season. and their shipping costs are ridiculous. There's other sites that sell the same brands of masks, but don't charge you like $40 in shipping. I don't know what that is about, but really, masks are very light. There's no reason to be charging 20, 30, 40, $50 for shipping. All right. I read Capital and I'm revisiting it 5 years later. Much easier to grasp concepts this time around. That's true. It's complicated stuff. It can take a while for it to sink in, for sure. And just learning dialectical materialism. It is, the proverbial paradigm shift, as people say, really is. It's a higher form of thought than just sort of classical logic. So it does take a while to shift your thinking to it, for sure. Is that video on LaRouche ever coming out? Well, I've covered LaRouche a few times. I feel like after the Patsocks got outed as just basically LaRoucheites, they have been falling into they've been falling off the map more and more. No one takes them seriously anymore. I think MAGA communism was like the last gasp. Hashtag MAGA communism, ridiculous thing that Infracell came up with. And they just had that conference 10 days ago, the October 15 Schiller Institute, that's a LaRouche think tank conference in New York City, where they're all posing outside of like BlackRock. What? Just bizarre stuff. But yeah, now that they've like outed themselves as just right wingers, LaRoucheites and Republicans and Duganists, like it's kind of over. I think. I think that MAGA communism was like the official point where of like self parody, basically. So, I mean, we've done some things on LaRouche. I don't feel like there's a huge need for a ton more on it. I think I just covered LaRouche stuff in like the second to last video, actually. So we've done a few things about that, and Revolutionary Left Radio did a whole thing on it. There's another podcast which I want to, I think it's called The Right Podcast. Let me just look this up real quick. LaRouche. They did a really long video on LaRouche that a bunch of people were linking for a while. Yeah, it's on Twitter. It's at The Right Podcast, and yeah, they did a whole thing. They do a lot of things about right wing extremism and this and that, and they've done an episode. I don't feel like I have a ton to bring to the table on that. Like we will do stuff on LaRouche like every other month or something, just to keep it like as a reminder that if you ever see this stuff, that's what it is. But yeah, I feel like the Patsock thing is kind of falling apart. Great. So yeah. Various comments on some of the channels that I've linked. Nobody's perfect, myself included, but again, it's like if you want to watch a good chunk of content, that's the point of these channels that I've linked, is people who I think are, generally on the right track there. And this probably isn't the last round, but I didn't want to overwhelm people to start. So I picked a dozen, and that's what we went with. So yeah. And there's other channels that I might be inclined to recommend, but I maybe had like one or two reservations about. And, I don't know, maybe I'll recommend them 6 months from now, or maybe I won't, so. Oh my God, moist caterpillar. This is not how you engage with people. Literally, this is what this person has said. Socialism sent me to jail. Listen, buddy, stealing is the wrong thing to do, man. There's nothing worth spending 10 years in jail for it. That didn't even really make sense. And then they go, everyone please listen to me. Invite me onto stream. And then they continue with slurs. Yeah, that's not going to get you the kind of attention you're looking for. Let me just tell you that. Thank you, people, for not engaging with the troll, as always. Just let me take care of them. That's easier for everybody. It makes the chat easier to read. And yeah, critical support to the Kaiser of Germany against the imperialist USA. That really is the territory we're getting into. Uh, Imperialists fighting imperialism is just a war between imperialists. It's not anti-imperialism. Yeah, Infracell trying to take over CPUSA. Good luck with that. The people involved with that, the like mecha tankies and people have the Infracell profile picture. They have no social skills whatsoever. So I mean, good luck trying to take anything over in real life. Thanks for the tip. I think I've been doing my COVID test wrong because I have all the symptoms of COVID, but both tests came back negative. Yeah, try it again. And, you can order tests online. There's probably going to be another rapid test shortage like there was last winter. All this stuff is produced on a for profit basis. And we did a story a while back about one of the companies dumping test kit ingredients because it wasn't profitable enough for them at a particular time, so they're just destroying them. And again, more reasons to abolish capitalism. We need to build parties that fight being cringe. Yeah, you want parties that resonate with people, for sure, that actually speak to the issues that the general working masses are concerned with. And it's not hard. Poll after poll shows what people are actually concerned about. You look at, I get something like Occupy, it wasn't well organized, the Occupy effort, but there were a number of themes and topics that came out of it consistently, and so there's definitely the basis of a starting point for major popular reform that would be sort of mass traction stuff, and I think a left coalition could pick that up. We could build more communists from there. Communists are a very small almost negligible part of the political landscape right now. I do think that that's changing, but it's changing. Why? I mean, there's more interest in class struggle since 2008, but people go in different directions from there. I do think a left coalition would be good for communism. I think it would get us out there, and it would put us in a position where more people are listening to us. We'll be on different panels and things as part of the coalition. We'll be able to give our take, and we'll be able to shape the politics and policies of such a coalition. So, you look at PSL's platform, you look at even like Howie Hawkins of the Greens platform, various groups run with like transitional demands. There's a lot of overlap there. Bernie Sanders had the same thing, a little bit more watered down, but the United States is so far behind what people want out of it. The proletariat is a very large portion of the population. Fewer and fewer people are even petty bourgeois at this point. And, the political system just has not given people anything for like 40 years. So there's a lot that could be done to bring things up to date. But obviously, that's not the point of communism. The point is to make the idea of struggle commonplace and to push for all the reforms that the system can demand and then some, and then guide people beyond the end of the system into the abolition of capitalism so that we can actually realize all of the changes, including the ones that capitalism will never be able to deliver. And it's in part those parliamentary struggles that show that there are real limits to what capitalism is ever going to be able to deliver. And that this was the point of the last audiobook that I put up that Lenin said, was that, the cadets, basically similar to the Democratic Party of their time, was all about relying on the inactivity and the fear and the subservience of the masses rather than their more radical and revolutionary side. And, they do the lesser evilism and all that. Whereas Lenin was pushing the line that really the only point of socialists, communists, pursuing parliamentary seats was just to advance the class struggle, not to get specific things, but to show people how limited that was, etc. I mean, go listen to the thing that he said. But yeah, we have a left. It's fragmented. A lot of it is not Marxist. And this is the left that we have in the United States. The question is not what ultimately should it be, and let's jump to that right now. It's how do we get from where we are to where we need to be? And again, I'm throwing left coalition out there. Basically, the pitch is redo the Bernie Sanders moment, but outside the Democratic Party, with groups that are willing to fight both Democrats and Republicans, but who aren't, libertarians, and in a coalition that includes all of the various Marxists that are out there. Obviously, that's not going to be the end of the struggle. It's going to be the beginning of the struggle. But putting the left back on the map, I saw so much movement and traction during the two Bernie Sanders campaigns. I started this channel in 2019 when Sanders was running his second campaign, and a lot of people are in the S4A audience now who started more on the Bernie side. They always kind of wanted more than Bernie was offering or could deliver, but they didn't know how to get there. And that's part of the point of this channel, is to help people over to the far left, but you have to put yourself out there in the first place. Again, I'd say left coalition, because what we learned through Bernie Sanders, obviously he betrayed the entire movement and fed people into the Democratic Party, but what we learned out of that is that there are stadium-filling crowds everywhere in the United States who want some kind of radical change, obviously to different extents and with different ideologies. But this is where some ideological struggle can actually take place on the left. And I saw that happening in both cases. Socialists saying, hey, Bernie Sanders is, going to do this and he's bad on foreign policy. But we're actually having a conversation. Versus when things like that are not happening, we don't have those conversations, and the ideological struggle kind of slumps into the background a bit more. We need to bring that back out, bring out the class struggle, and continue the agitation. But if people, I think one of the leading things about the U.S. left is people just believing nothing is possible, and so people really get quiet and then inactive. And we need to change people's minds about, first of all, the role of electoral politics, and that building a party doesn't mean winning elections. It means building a party. And there's all kinds of other activity you can do, and you don't need to wait around for, what may be a rigged electoral system where the parties will keep you out of the debates. And actually, Fellow Traveler did a good video on recently, a couple months ago, on like the many ways that the elections are rigged. So, building a party means building a party. And, you can have a strong socialist communist movement, and it can be one party, it can be multiple parties, that maybe you don't have many seats in the government, maybe you win some local seats, maybe whatever, but you can have strong penetration into labor unions and other community unions and organizations. So you can, building a party means building a party. It doesn't just mean winning elections. And anyway, I think that's an important thing for people to remember. Continuing. Yeah, fighting the chauvinism. I mean, it's like the infracell movement trying to take over CPUSA. You really think that's going to make it better or worse? They're, the loud chauvinism and reactionary tendencies. Exactly. USA going to have another 1 million plus cases of COVID this winter in a day. Well, I think that we were hitting, we were hitting that last winter. I think it's entirely possible. So let's look real quick. I brought this out before, but I don't often highlight this particular point. This is a week or two behind. But there's the COVID wastewater curve, which kind of forget cases at this point because they're not really even counting cases anymore. Between the rapid tests and, they're not even giving out free rapid tests anymore. They cost a decent amount of money a pop. So people are just walking around with COVID. It's like they're not even necessarily getting tested. But you look at what was going on last year, and it was like, for a while, we were just having like 1 million cases a day at the peak in January. And I mean, it's insane doing that, especially when you consider that 20% of those people, roughly, at least 15% of those people are going to get some kind of long COVID or have lasting symptoms from the organ damage. And again, that's per day. And those are the officially counted cases. Now, again, I think the case count is no longer a number to go by because it's dramatically undercounted to the point, in my opinion, of being useless. I do still follow the wastewater because that's a more accurate measure. But look at the curve. So we're already at the hospitalization rate of Delta, and it's only October. But if you look at where it says January 2022 at the bottom, go to the left. That little spike there, that was Delta. All right. And if you look at the trough in between the Delta peak and the huge Omicron peak, the little trough, and then it starts going up again, that is October 25th of last year. Was just coming out of that little trough after the Delta peak. So that's where we were last year. Now compare the Delta curve with what we've had so far this year. It's much, much, much bigger, much, much, much worse. So will we get as big of a spike with Omicron, well, as, what we had last year with Omicron? This year it would be fueled by variants like XBB, BQ1, BQ11. That's what's starting to surge now. We don't know what it's going to be by December because Omicron really only came in, I think, late November, early December. And then it really started kicking our asses in late December in the United States. So we don't know yet what variants is going to be. We know that there's about 5 surging variants right now. And we've got 5 surging variants right now. I don't know what else to say. Again, we'll cover this more in the next couple of days. But, you look at that curve, are we, compared to the Delta curve, which was then followed by the Omicron spike, what are we going to get for a spike this winter? I think it's going to be really bad. So will it be 1 million cases a day again? It might, and it might not. So we will see. But I think it's going to be bad regardless. I wish I could get samples of various masks. It's hard to find good fitting ones. Yeah, I hear that, and I got a couple of different kinds. You can get 20 packs for like $20. I got like a couple of them, and I got a recommendations list actually. I haven't tried any of these. Where did I put that list? I would read them on the stream if I could find the list. I want to say off the top of my head that it was 3M 9105s and 9205 pluses, and then another one, I want to say it was Harley L-188. If I have to, yeah. Anyway, I'll see if I can confirm that. But I'm off the top of my, actually, here, let me see if I have it. 9105. That come up for anything? Yeah, I think it's 9105 and 9205 plus. Those are both N95s. And then the Harley L-188. I haven't tried them yet, but those were some of the recommendations that I saw. So, did I see schools in one state having 30% plus absence rates with masses of kids being sick? Appears even more severe than COVID. The school I saw had 1,000 out of 2,600 kids at home sick on a single day, with nearby schools having similar issues the same week. I saw some things like that. I didn't see that specific thing. This is why I said there's like an avalanche of stuff that I want to be covering on COVID this week. It's hitting bad. I didn't even see figures that bad, but that's horrific. My question is, at what point do people snap out of the fucking trance? I know Americans are cowards, but this is ridiculous. Where is the limit? When do people, doctors, teachers, nurses, public health professionals, scientists, when do you start saying, hey, I think this is a real problem, we need to do something different? When do you demand action? Again, we don't have a culture of protest in the United States. That's why I was like, hey, you want to throw soup on a painting to disrupt something? Fucking go for it. And besides, it was on the protective glass over it. People are so goddamn inert. It makes me sick. And this stuff is just going on. Let's criticize tactics after we get some fucking tactics going. Because the main criticism I have right now is nothing is happening. So, yeah. While I wish people wouldn't get long COVID, is there any hope of something to help treat the organ damage caused by long COVID? Sorry if hope is the wrong word. Just like, is there anything that can help treat it or being developed to? So there are various long COVID clinics in the UK, in the US, I assume other places. They're trying various things. I don't think, like the cause of long COVID isn't entirely understood. there's various things theorized to be happening. So there's autoimmunity being developed, COVID causing you to react against your own tissue. There is gut microbiome, so that's the bacteria that live in your intestines, disruption, because the intestines, the gut, is a big reservoir for the COVID virus, SARS coronavirus 2. And it seems to be impacting the health of the gut microbiome, which is hugely important. You have more non-human cells in your body than you have human cells in your body, and a lot of them are in your gut. They help digest your food, but they do so much more than that. They do all the alchemy of breaking down and converting chemicals that your own human cells don't do as well. So this is like, I think actually, so cows, eat grass and they chew the cud and they have multiple sections of their stomach and then they like puke it back up and then they chew the cud, right? That's cows. It's actually the bacteria that live in their various stomachs that break down a lot of the grass. It's not even like their own bodies that do it. But so we have these symbiotic relationships with all these microorganisms. You have pounds of them in your digestive system of just bacteria. And you need them to produce neurotransmitters, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, this gets disrupted by COVID, apparently. There's other things like persistent infection, like actually lingering infection in the brain, in other organs. There's a variety of things that, as people study long COVID, more research is coming out on. Actually, there's a channel I've featured before. Let me see if I can... it was Run DMC, Gez Medinger. I'll see if I can put the... I haven't actually checked back on this channel in a while, but they were talking to some scientists on this YouTube channel who were dealing, I thought, very intelligently with questions about long COVID. And again, this was a while ago, so I don't know if they've gone off into like La La Land or not. Actually, it looks pretty good. So yeah, Gez Medinger, Run DMC1 is the handle of the channel. And some guy doing a lot of stuff about long COVID and the science for it. Viral persistence seems to be one of the dominant theories. So anyway, I'd recommend that channel. I'll put a link to it in the chat. It's youtube.com/c/RUNDMC, the number 1. There it is. So if you want to learn some more about long COVID, we cover a lot of individual articles. They kind of have a whole channel going on about it right now. But yeah, so can it be treated? I mean, if you get nerve damage or brain damage, there's very little that nerve tissue, or which is brain tissue as well, only regenerates under extraordinary circumstances. Usually if you get nerve damage, it's permanent. So basically no in that case, although people, I think the cognitive damage caused by COVID, cognitive decline, typically does not rebound. Some of the emotional disorders that COVID can cause tend to get better after a year. So it depends. I've also heard of cases of people taking antiviral drugs and then noticing a reduction in their long COVID symptoms, which again suggests that viral persistence. I read another, and again, this is anecdotal, but I read another one of somebody saying that they got the new Novavax vaccine and their long COVID seems to have gone away after getting that. So there's a lot of evidence for that long COVID is caused by viral persistence. Therefore, things that can end that persistent low-level infection by SARS coronavirus 2 living on in the body, continuing to replicate, something that could fight that would be helpful. So yes and no, it's kind of hit and miss. There's studies on it, but it's not really the focus is like treating it. A lot of people barely acknowledge long COVID, so we're way behind on all that, unfortunately. All right. If I recall, Cuba is developing a treatment for the mental effects of long COVID that's also effective for dementia, but don't quote me on that. I have not heard that. Let me see. I'll make a note of that, see if I can look it up. Cuba and mental effects, COVID. A lot of times I write things down. I'll get to them for like 3 months, but we'll see. Oh boy, health revolt. That was a great audiobook choice considering CPUSA claimed that Lenin advocated for voting in cadets against the Black Hundreds. I didn't even see that, but yeah, if they said that, that's flat wrong. I'd like to see the quote for it, at least, because that runs counter to everything I've read on Lenin regarding elections. Engaging people in real struggle. If you can't unionize your job, unionize your neighbors. You do what you can. There's probably some kind of community organization in your area. Even if you're out in the sticks, it might be on a county-wide basis, but look around, check it out. This is another reason why I recommend people, at least if there's nothing going on, check in with your local DSA and or Greens, because if something's going on, there's like 70% odds probably that they're going to know of some other projects you can get involved in. You know, networking usually does not hurt. Knowing more people who are vaguely on the left is usually a good thing when you're trying to get projects going. You'd be surprised what you can get people involved with. Now, I'll say it like I say every time. If you do get involved with DSA, anytime that the issue of endorsing Democrats comes up, fight against it. The U.S. left needs to break from the Democratic Party, and DSA is, a prime example of that. But for a lot of people, it's the only thing going on in the area. And see if you can meet any people, because odds are there's going to be other Marxists who, are sort of slumming it, or if you will. Sometimes they're not even that bad. But network, get to know people in your community. Don't just live online. And yeah, you're going to meet people too who are super cringe going with any of those. But again, this is the U.S. left that we have. We have to work with it and improve it. And not every single person in the U.S. left is really open to changing much. They might be, kind of more petty bourgeois Democrats and not communists and whatever. And maybe some of them are super resistant to that. I know somebody who's like, I can have decent conversations with. They're very progressive. They're also a landlord. I mean, they're not a huge landlord, but they own like 2 or 3 small buildings. And like, it's a sore subject every time it comes up. So yeah, they're not a communist. But they're, I can have certain conversations with them. And I'm glad that I know that person. So get to know people, because you never know different actions. It just helps to have people who you may be able to tap to get involved with, And also, if your faction, if you're able to network a communist group together, you may have the beginnings of a party for your area if none of the other parties are present there. And you may be able to knit something together and get it started. And if you get strong enough and you're doing good enough actions and you get, you develop a role in your community, then you'll have the influence and other political groups will kind of have to work with you. So, I think a lot of people getting into the U.S. left in like the last couple of years maybe are very novices, like not novice status politically, and don't understand you have to build things. It's not just handed to you. The U.S. left has been very fringe, very marginal for a long time, and if we want to have stuff now in the 2020s going into the 2030s, we have to build it. The boomer generation like let a lot of things fall apart, really going back to like the 70s and stuff, and we got to put it back together, and then got in the way of anything new being built. We've got to build it. It's not just like handed to you. It's not released like a movie or video game. You actually have to build it. We have to create it. So, that's what I mean when I say this is the left we have. We have to improve upon it, and you can't merely just complain about it. You have to work with it to do the agitation, education, organization. We need more struggle because, the vanguard is the most class-conscious section of the working class. That's what it means. And you can develop class consciousness in part from reading books and reading history, but also nothing sharpens class consciousness as much as directly participating in struggle. If we don't have struggles going on, then class consciousness is overall going to be lower. So, Yeah, we got to break out of this inaction, and we probably don't even have the party that's going to be our party. Probably, it's another reason I advocate for Left Coalition to get out there, network, have people go back and forth. This person started in this party, but then after working with this party in a coalition, they actually joined the other party. It's a place, like I said, for ideological struggle, and people can actually finish refining their left politics and hopefully come over and be a communist and things like that. But it's when you actually engage in that interplay of ideas and actions and events, that's where people actually are confronted with that stuff, have to think about it, and then make those kinds of decisions. So if nothing's happening, then nothing happens. But it's likely that whatever party we actually wind up with at the end is a combination of splinters off of existing groups. Some whole existing groups might join that party, and we might get new formations that don't even exist yet that become part of whatever our party eventually is. But yeah, I don't think it exists right now, and I think that we need more struggle and sort of reshuffling of the chairs to to form that party. To me, it seems like a coalition of existing parties is probably the fastest way towards that. But again, that's my opinion. Critical support for Joe Sims against Infracell. I'm not even sure I would go that far. Obviously, no support for Infracell, but at this point, the Joe Sims literally wrote an article in the 2020 election that was, it concluded with, if you don't vote Democrat, it means you like Trump. And it was just like, this is not helpful. This is not helpful. So neither is good in that situation, unfortunately. Again, my opinion. If you own your own home or can't organize your neighbors, then help someone else unionize their neighbors. Yeah, show up to different groups and meetings. Just volunteer. See what they're doing. Be like, look, I'm a Marxist. I do Marxist reading and I follow left politics. I'm just here to help. What do you guys need help with? A lot of times groups need extra hands, and it might be for something super mundane, but just volunteer. I remember our org wanting to do some community building between us and DSUSA. I don't know if that's a Freudian slip there, but we had some people who were a part of them and could do that. And we reached out to other environmental groups. Would Left Coalition act as a bridge between groups where overlap exists, almost like a resource or hub to get leaders and members in communication when they do inevitably want to signal boost campaigns or need spontaneous action? That would seem to be immensely valuable. Well, it's also a lot of the groups are too small to do that much on their own, but when you get more people together, it tends to improve quality of ideas, and also you pool resources and you can do more stuff. One group might have an idea that they don't have the resources to pull off, but if you join forces with another group in pursuit of that idea, then you can actually get it done, and you might get some other people contributing ideas that you just didn't even think of because somebody shows up and they say, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Actually, do you know, Mary so-and-so who works at the whatever? And nobody in your group knows Mary so-and-so who works at the whatever. Oh, well, I know her, and she knows a guy or she has access to this, and that we could use that. You'd be surprised, again, when you network with people and you get more people together, there's synergy. It's not just like a buzzword. You actually do get effects that are greater than just the apparent sum of the parts. So, a coalition is an organization of organizations. It's like with body tissues. You have cells make tissues make organs. Okay. Well, it's like you have individuals form parties form coalitions. So each party would still retain its own independence, its own sovereignty. I mean, it would retain its own independent existence. But for the sake of acting in, what we would call, hashtag left coalition, the parties would come together and make a set of, bylaws or guidelines or however formal you want it to be, where when we do actions in this joint format, this is the decision-making process that we're going to use, and this is the voting process that we're going to use, and this is the meeting procedure that we're going to use, and all that kind of stuff. Each group is still going to have their own independent existence, their own independent party meetings, but you would also sometimes team up in a coalition for various left purposes around the community. That's the basic idea. So, I'm in 3 orgs. All are small and are different tendencies. My Marxist-Leninist org, I want to be able to influence the others, but it takes time, I guess, and a lot of work for a small group of people. Yeah, I mean, and this is, nobody is going to automatically listen to your group. You come together, maybe have a meeting, like, again, kick around ideas of projects that you are working on, projects that you're working on that you think you could take to the next level with a bigger group, projects that you've had the idea for, but, don't have the resources to get off the ground, and just see what happens. But getting more people together in a coalition, again, things can happen that way. By this point, we need spacesuits to protect ourselves from COVID. In China, they were taking that a lot more seriously. It's Tyvek suits that are used. Same things that are used for some like mailing envelopes because it's water resistant. But yeah, Tyvek. That's. I mean, you don't. Even if we just did the fucking masks, weekly testing, quarantining, stuff like that, it would be so much more under control, and we wouldn't be getting this crazy spread of new variants that are just being generated by the virus mutating and mutating because it's replicating and replicating. You could slow all this down to where you could maybe get it under control. Ignoring problems that will kill you is the stupidest thing to do. We're coming up on Halloween, and probably most people have heard of the movie Night of the Living Dead. George Romero is like one of the 1968, I think, one of the first like major zombie movies. It's in black and white. That's how old it is. Also lower budget because the black and white film was cheaper. But anyway, Romero went to pitch the movie to whatever studio was thinking of buying. They're like, "What is this movie about?" And he said, "It's about ignoring the problem. Like, we can't put that on a movie poster. What is this movie about?" And it's like, okay, well, it's about zombies, or it's about the dead returning to life. But to Romero, basically, the plot of Night of the Living Dead is what happens when you ignore a problem. That, to him, is what Night of the Living Dead is about. And yeah, ignoring problems that will kill you is the stupidest thing to do. USA has a mass death wish. It definitely seems that way to me sometimes. And after all, their culture is basically killing humanity. Yeah. Yeah, to the extent that you're consciously participating in that while aware of other options, for sure. That is consciously participating in a culture of death. I think many people in this culture have despair and fear at levels where they, at least unconsciously, have like a massive death wish. And so you see hugely self-destructive behavior at the societal level. Now, a lot of this is capitalism, and it's being encouraged for the sake of profit by capitalists, etc. But, the psychology of the individual living in this system, without even being exposed to any, or without specifically taking up the propaganda, but just witnessing the effects of the system, the way that it impacts them, their family members, their friends, their schoolmates, their workmates, their other people that go to their church or other organizations that may be a part of. Watching this system tick along in a way that tells you in 100 different ways every day that the system values money over human life. It has a crippling effect on people's just joy, will to live, whatever. It's enormously soul-crushing. Witnessing and being asked to, in some cases almost being forced to, participate in a culture that does not value human life above the profits of a tiny few. Yeah, it's crushing, and I do think it's resulted in this sort of giant despairing death wish in the U.S. Obviously, we're trying to fight against that. We're not in favor of that here. We're the anti-death wish party. Yeah. Have I read Necro-Capitalism, A Plague Journal? No, I have not, but I'll open a new tab for it, which is the preliminary step to getting it to it in the next 6 months or so. Thank you for that. Um, while brain damage is currently incurable, how far is research on any sort of treatment for it? I think that the best you could do, probably in that case, is to stop the damage. I don't think you're necessarily gonna. Well, there's different things that can improve cognitive function. Um, I mean, even things like doing crossword puzzles and stuff like that. So there's different ways to stimulate cognitive activity and cognitive function. Once you have physical damage, I mean, the brain is resilient to a degree. There's a lot of the portions of the brain we don't seem to use, or at least don't understand what they're for. And there's definitely a lot of research of people recovering, like whether it's learning to speak again after a stroke, learning to use other parts of the brain to still do the same thing. It's not through the same neurological pathways, but you can still reclaim some of that function again. So, I unfortunately we're still kind of, I think, in the early stages of long COVID treatment research. I'll tell you what though, a lot of what I've been doing in these streams is just recommending to people don't get COVID because here are the serious repercussions of long COVID XYZ. And we've read a few things about clinics that are starting to try to treat it. The gist I have gotten on all of that is that nobody has very good treatment so far. So I think that that's the state of it. But I'll make a point in my notes to see if, I do think still the point that we're at, by and large, issue number one right now, is preventing infection. The best way not to get long COVID is don't get short COVID. So, because they're really one and the same, obviously. Once you've gotten long COVID, what do you do about it? Again, check out that channel that I posted the link to, Run DMC1. Probably of all the places I know, they're going to have the most research on that. But I'll make a point of trying to, for those who have been suffering with long COVID, trying to do something about it. I do think, like in the case of if it's a persistent infection, there are things that can be done. Whether it's antivirals or other ways to like purge the body of stuff. But we'll get into that another time. I'll see if I can dig up a show on that. Okay, so on the Cuba thing, it wasn't dementia, it was Alzheimer's. They have said it's also effective against COVID sequelae. Yeah, so I mean, COVID causes damage in the brain similar to things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and it can predispose one to developing conditions like that. So yeah, I could see how one would be also effective against the other. That's really good. That's really good. It'd be cool if I posted VODs or VODs. So I said this last time. Go to the YouTube channel because I post these entire streams over on YouTube. youtube.com/socialism for all, FORALL. And you can find all of the live streams. This is number 57. And I have been breaking them up with the timestamps. I haven't been chopping them up into segments. That's a bit more labor intensive for me. Also, the streams don't exactly go entirely linearly all the time. So I think that timestamps works better than individual segments. But yeah, if you want the live streams, they're also on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/socialism for all. You can download, if you have a SoundCloud account, which is free, you can download the MP3 and then listen to it without using your data. Some people go into organizing energetically and think that energy gets others motivated. I think a lot of the apathetic people in orgs are looking for good leadership. Let me tell you another problem with a lot of orgs is burnout. People will go in very energetic for a year, maybe two tops. There's otherwise inertia. Things are not clicking. And then people burn out in a year and a half. And then I've experienced this myself. and I've seen it in others. So yeah, this is especially the case with groups on the smaller side, where people have energy but not necessarily a lot of resources or connections or even knowledge of like how to get started. So that is a running problem with many organizations where you get huge turnover. And it's like working in a retail or food service kind of business where it's like we live in a high turnover culture when it comes to people's organizational organizational affiliations. So whether it's a job, whether it's a political organization, people get in and get out in like a year and a half. So yeah, there's different reasons for that, but the burnout of living in this society is huge, and we need to fix that problem for our organizations as well. So as far as the rest of the comment, a lot of the apathetic people in orgs are looking for good leadership. Yeah, some people are just not natural leaders. Some people get a lot of ideas that spring into their head. They're visionaries, like they get clear pictures in their mind of sort of what to do next. And a lot of other people, they may be analysts or this or that. They may not be visionaries per se. There's people have different roles within organizations is the point. And, there's also leaders who aren't visionaries. Just leaders are people who know how to motivate other people. They know how to delegate tasks, things like that. You need all these things in an organization. If you're missing key elements, the organization may not come together. But yeah, I think that the burnout and the high turnover is a huge problem in organizations. Again, one of the reasons that I think DSA, for a lot of their SOCDEM positions and obviously endorsing Democrats, I think some areas are more or less likely to do that. They're at least bigger where it's a bit more stable as an organization. So whether or not those are the ideal politics that you want to, have endure forever, there's something to be learned there about just having the thing not burn out inside of 6 months. You're welcome for advice and validation. Like I said, this is the left we have, and if we want to take steps forward, this is the left that's going to be taking those steps forward. You can't just idealistically be like, we're going to invent a new left out of whole cloth, and it's just going to appear magically out of thin air. No, it's working within the context of all of the history up to this point in time. So some of that history is more relevant than other pieces, but yeah. Covidiceps, there you go. For COVID influencing people's minds, as was a theory we sort of speculatively threw out there last time. I always conceptualize zombies as our collective unconscious bias toward proletarians' massive. The punctuation is, I think, a bit lacking in this comment. Toward proletarians' massive unclean mind. Oh, okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah, there's something about zombies, people's fear of other people, or sort of the unthinking. It's sort of like people at their worst, just being driven by instinct and no critical thinking. It's like that bumper sticker, never underestimate the power of large groups of stupid people or stupid people acting in large groups. Yeah, it's true. We do, I think, all fear human capacity for mindlessly going along with stuff, particularly just, base level instinct. It is kind of a horrifying sight. Of course, then there's the whole, the freaky, like the dead are actually walking again side of it. But yeah, on another level, it does, I think, speak to people's fear of people in that unthinking mode. And then vampire stories are about the sort of blood-sucking elites, whether it's, the feudal ruling class or capitalist ruling class, whatever. Yep. Lenin always called them the vampire class, but I like to think of them as mosquitoes. Yeah, so that's like on the banner of the Socialism for All YouTube channel right now. There's a quote from Marx and a quote from Lenin, and I think that represents Marxism, Leninism in yet another way. But abolition of private property and abolition of the parasite state is how Lenin referred to the capitalist state in The State and Revolution, which if U.S. leftists in particular were going to read one work, and one work only about communism, I would say Principles of Communism but I think that The State and Revolution is really more, it speaks to a lot of the particular questions that people have in the U.S. about the role of the state in the process of socialism and revolution, hence The State and Revolution. I recommend, that's why it's the pinned video at Socialism for All, YouTube. Yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on with the WEF here in the comments. All right, we'll let we got the vampire versus werewolf class struggle going on in the comments. All right, we'll let people figure out what's going on with the WEF, if that means World Economic Forum, in the comments or not. In the meantime, let's look at the actual content that I did pull for today's video at 147 and change here. All right, so again, this is not a flat-out endorsement. I just found this interesting and I wanted to share it. So here's a Twitter account, not a huge account I recently started following. Ted Reese at Grossmanite, and I guess has been involved in popularizing and publishing the works of Henryk Grossman. So who was Grossman? I'm actually new to Grossman, but he was Polish. Let's read that. This is from the Marxist Internet Archive. Let's read the Grossman bio here. And I apologize again for all this resizing hijinks and shenanigans here. I will figure this out eventually. It used to just put the thing like maxed out for size right in the middle. It doesn't do that anymore automatically. I don't know why. Henryk Grossman, 1881 to 1950. Again, this is courtesy of Marxists.org. Starts with a quote from Grossman. What was the year 1929 in the USA and the year 1931 in Germany and England, if not a giant breakdown of the capitalist system? The working class was not prepared for this. It did not have a Lenin who awaited and worked toward such a moment. Rather, for decades it heard from Hilferding and Helena Bauer that a breakdown was impossible. Only such a disorientation of the working class made it possible for the ruling class to overcome the panic and to survive the breakdown. Quoting Henryk Grossman. So we're going to read his bio in a second, but so I guess a lot of his contributions were about capitalist breakdown, and he was using Marxist economic analysis to basically call the Great Depression before it happened. He said there's going to be a giant breakdown in capitalism. Indeed there was. And like he says, you need to be preparing for this ahead of time with your movement. Now, how did the U.S. and Western Europe dodge, more popular uprisings in 2008? Because they had been telling the public up until that point, capitalism had completely, solved all of its problems. And, I'm getting some, my audio is starting to get chopped up. I don't know if I need to, great. Started. Oh. Wait, there it is. Oh, you know what it is? My browser crashed. All right, where was I now? I'm like way behind in the audio of the stream here. So monitoring myself at this point is going to be really... Sorry, having technical problems. We will reestablish in just a second. I don't know. I'm waiting for the audio to catch up with what I'm doing, and then I'll just resume what I was talking about 2008. Sorry for the inconvenience here. Where are we? So I can't even actually hear myself right now. Let's turn the monitoring on and off. Hey, okay, better. Great. Hopefully you're all out there in the chat and that nothing is going too weird with that. All right, so let's just continue because I am recording this offline anyway. What were we saying? So 2008, the capitalists had been telling people for a long time that, oh no, we've finally overcome all the contradictions in capitalism and we've finally gotten this system to be stable again, and we basically worked out all the bugs. So you all forget about class struggle, let your guard down, and just basically listen to us and let us take it from here. You don't need to organize independently. Again, forget about socialism, communism. Capitalism has overcome all, and it is the future. And then, boom, 2008 happened. Global economic meltdown. So, what did we get after that? We got the Tea Party, which was a Republican Party astroturfing effort to put up a new face of the Republican Party after Bush and Cheney had burned out a lot of the goodwill of that party, their public image basically. And it also was a pseudo-populist front to, basically let people vent their anger about the global economic meltdown, but lead them away from the cause of the actual problem, which was, of course, capitalism. So that's basically what Grossman is describing here. Rather, for decades, the working class heard from Hilferding and Helena Bauer that a breakdown was impossible, and only that kind of disorientation of the working class made it possible for the ruling class to overcome the panic of the Great Depression and survive that breakdown. You can find pamphlets from the early 30s saying, this is it for capitalism, and finally now the socialists are going to be able to overcome it. But really, the working class was not organized enough in that moment, and the capitalists were able to regroup. So the same thing with 2008. And we're going to look at a thread based on the economic work of Grossman describing what's going on today, how there is likely a crash much bigger than 2008 on the horizon. This does not automatically lead to socialism. It does not negate the need for revolution or Marxism-Leninism, anything like that. What it does mean is that breakdown is coming. That does not automatically lead to socialism. It just leads to breakdown. And in fact, what it probably leads to is fascism if we don't get socialism going. Because the more vulnerable the system gets, the more exposed they feel, the more likely that they're going to turn to worse and worse forms of harsher and harsher control. The good news is that for us, it means another opening. It was hard to attack capitalism head on in the 90s and the 2000s when, this whole end of history narrative was going. But as capitalism enters a breakdown crisis, it becomes more vulnerable again. So that's why we need to keep channels like this going. Any kind of effort that is, parties, real world stuff, whatever, Discord groups where people discuss theory, whatever it is, we need to keep all this stuff going and keep in perspective for all the disagreements that we may have with different people and factions within it who are sincerely on the path, that this is absolutely vital work to head off the next crisis and to get the working class into the best possible position for when this breakdown happens, doing something productive with it in terms of agitating, educating, and organize. So because we have to organize to abolish capitalism, organize on a level which is like we're not even close to right now. So this really has to be kicked up into overdrive. And again, we'll see it with some economic charts that breakdown is likely looming again. We'll get to that in just a minute. So who was Henryk Grossman? Henryk Grossman, according to MIA, was born in Krakow in Galicia, the Austrian-ruled section of the then-partitioned Poland. Active in the socialist movement in high school, he joined the Polish Social Democratic Party, PPSD. At university, he became active in organizing Jewish workers and struggled against the opportunism and chauvinism of the PPSD. He helped to lead a split of Jewish workers from the PPSD in May 1905 to form the Jewish Social Democrat Party of Galicia, and he was elected party secretary, occupying leadership positions for the next 3 years. With the defeat of the 1905 revolution and the subsequent decline in the working class movement, he left active politics and worked as a statistician and economist. After the war, he joined the Communist Workers' Party of Poland in 1920. That was, of course, World War I. Persecuted by the police and imprisoned for several terms, ranging from 2 to 8 months, Repression forced him into exile in Frankfurt at the end of 1925. He became associated with the Frankfurt Institute and wrote his major work On Capitalist Breakdown and related articles. He was forced into exile again in 1933, first to Britain and then the U.S. He returned to Germany in 1949 after the war, joining the Socialist Unity Party as professor of political economy at the University of Leipzig, where he died the following year. Note on naming, Henryk Grossman is the name by which he was known in Poland. It's the name used in those works whose preparation he oversaw himself. Henryk Grossman with two N's is an alternative rendering, widely used in older editions and many commentaries, is only used in this archive in bibliographical references. So I think I will probably do at least a work or two of Grossman's after we've done more of Marx's economic work. So far, the thing we've done most on this channel is Lenin. We've done almost 100 Lenin audiobooks, over 90. And that's partly because of me and just things that I'm interested in, because I was more familiar with Marx than with Lenin coming into this channel, and I had a lot of catching up to do. We've read many, many works by Lenin, obviously, and that's partly just my preference. You know, somebody was commenting recently, Lenin never misses. I just love the commentaries so much. And anyway, but after we sort of go back into Marx's economic stuff, probably at that point we'll do some of Grossman. But let's go into, and again, this is not like a flat-out endorsement of Ted Reese. Again, I really don't know the guy. But here's a thread that he wrote on Twitter. And I'm presenting this to stimulate discussion. Tell me what you think. We'll have a discussion. All right, so a thread on empirical trends indicating, 1, that state monopoly capitalism is dying a natural death and approaching its final breakdown, as the evolution of production from mechanized to automated is abolishing the source of profit, specifically capital's theft of commodity-producing labor's labor time. So this is basically the falling rate of profit as more and more goes into automation and equipment versus labor, profit tends to fall. So anyway, and then point 2, state monopoly capitalism's economic technical basis is evolving into and birthing state monopoly socialism, meaning that the public ownership of the means of production is becoming a global economic necessity for the first time. Now, I just want to make a note here. Reese makes a note at the end. He nowhere wants to say that there is no need for revolution, as I think you could interpret from that. And there's another commenter who I share research with who took that interpretation. That's really not the way that I read this. And I think regardless of whether that's what Reese is saying or not, and it clearly isn't, at least per that final post that we're going to read in this thread, even if he was saying that, you could still take all of this analysis and still just apply your own political conclusion to the end. But I think that the point here is that capitalism is entering a period of weakness again, in which revolution may become, more possible, if you will, but also specifically that profit is running out on the system to the point where nothing will be profitable to do in capitalism soon. I believe that that is what Reese is saying when he says that public ownership of the means of production is becoming a global economic necessity for the first time. In other words, capitalism could have been abolished at any point prior to this, but it wasn't a necessity. Capitalism still had a future ahead of it if it were not abolished via revolution. I believe that what he's saying is that what the graph shows is line go down to the point where there is just literally no future for capitalism at this point. That's not to say it automatically goes into socialism at all. What it means is if you're going to continue the system, it can only be continued by socialism. And of course, as we know, as Marxist-Leninists, the way that you get socialism is through revolution. So in other words, this system is going to enter, my takeaway from reading this, as I'll soon share with you, is that capitalism is going to be entering a breakdown period where we get one of two options. Mad Max, libertarian hellscape, or socialism. Obviously avoiding the libertarian hellscape means organizing in, all the stuff that we're doing, abolition of private property, abolition of the parasite state, Marxism, Leninism in a nutshell. But that basically, it was optional, if you will, to abolish capitalism prior to this time. There literally is just going to be no future for the system at this point. So you will either have complete chaos or socialism, and it's up to us whether we organize as a class to abolish capitalism or not. Okay, I think I've overqualified that to a ridiculous degree. Let's continue. So, starting on point 1, official U.S. national debt to GDP ratio, ballooning with the public bailouts of the private sector in 2008 to 2009 and 2020 to 2021, hit an all-time high of 37.2% in 2021. Global debt hit a record $303 trillion in 2021. The relatively dwindling tax base makes this unsustainable. So you can see there, World War II was the actual peak prior to this historically, and the pandemic is back above now because it's the new record, so it has surpassed World War II. It's at a new record level. You can see that during the Great Recession, a lot was added. The pandemic and this crisis of capitalism adding even more, and then you see the projected curve up past 2040. So they're making the argument that the the dwindling tax base is making this unsustainable. So how do you continue doing this? The debt bubble is the third, quote, once in a century bubble. Yeah. It's like, I've seen many a meme where it's like, millennials are being asked to swallow a system that is giving you, once in a lifetime events every 5 years. But anyway, the debt bubble is the third, quote, once in a century bubble in 3 decades. There hasn't been an equivalent to this bubble since 1929, and an unprecedented everything bubble, because for the first time, it now encompasses all asset classes. So that chart there goes back to the 90s. You see the late 90s dot-com bubble up around 2000. That crashes around 2002, 2003. Starts climbing again, back up to about the same level, and you get the mortgage fraud and housing bubble in the mid to late 2000s. That crashes in 2008. And of course, because the mortgages were bound up in so many different financial instruments, there were, anyway, so much going on there. Watch the movie The Big Short if you want a really brief, entertaining 2-hour presentation of it. And then there's, of course, many other presentations as well. In fact, Richard Wolff, I haven't watched it in a while, but one of the first times I saw Richard Wolff was in 2008. He had like an hour-and-a-half lecture about that at the time. So then there was a huge crash, and now we are way past. We're, more than double the level of either the dot-com bubble or the mortgage fraud, housing bubble. We're in the everything bubble. What happens when this pops? Okay. What kind of, recession is this going to look like? And it's a bit of a frightening thought. Anyway, to prevent and postpone U.S. capital's bankruptcy, the U.S. Central Bank, Federal Reserve, had to buy corporate debt via unprecedented levels of electronic money, quote, printing or money creation. 80% of all U.S. dollars were printed in the 22 months between January 2020, when the supply was $4 trillion, and October 2021, when it shot up to $20 trillion. So we can see things happening on this chart. The chart goes back to the 1970s, and we're in unusual territory, to say the least, right now. Again, when this pops, what follows? The Fed's balance sheet rose from $900 billion in 2009 to $4.5 trillion in 2014, and then $9 trillion in 2020, an unprecedented tenfold increase in 11 years. Lifting the U.S. out of recession has required, on average, since 1958, a baseline interest rate cut of 6%. So that's how you get the U.S. out of recession. On average, since 1958, you cut interest rates 6%. but before the recent rise aimed at tackling soaring inflation had been punctuation I think here is off, but tackling soaring inflation had been more or less stuck at a record low of about 0.1 to 0.2 since late 2008. So you can see there, federal funds effective rate, and it used to be to get out of recession, you would cut it by about 6%. There's nothing left to cut at this point, is the point. We're already at zero. So how do you cut? How do you get out of a recession when you've already cut down as low as you can go? When it rose in January 2019 to 2.4% via relatively timid debt reduction, world GDP growth flatlined. So, okay, there was debt reduction, but you have GDP flatlining, the growth. Now a rise to just 1.58% has started a global recession. So again, this is the point, is where do you have left to go at this point? For more context, there's another thread here by Ed Conway linked. So for instance, take 1980. Back then, official BOE, I believe it's Bank of England, interest rates were on average 14.2%. But because people were much less heavily indebted, because their incomes were much higher versus their repayments, that was, in affordability terms, equivalent to 3% in today's interest rates. So, in other words, interest rates were much higher. However, people had much less debt. So the interest rates could be higher and people's interest payments would just be much, much lower. Now, what are they talking about? Incomes higher versus their repayments. So one of the things that changed around this time, going into the neoliberal period, and there's a great video, maybe somebody can say the name of the channel that did this in the chat, but there's a video featuring David Harvey, who is a Marxist author who does analysis on various topics like this, talking about the wage crisis being settled temporarily, of course, by extending much more credit to people. So in other words, we're not going to pay you wages anymore. We're going to keep your wages very low, but we'll make it easier to get credit cards, and then you can borrow money to buy washing machines and cars and all that kind of stuff. Previously, people were just paid, and then they wouldn't have to borrow so much. That changed a number of decades ago, and today the system is just people are much more indebted. So, continuing up here. That's not going fast enough. Across advanced capitalist nation states, nominal and real interest rates and bond yields have been declining in a secular trend ever closer to zero and beyond, regardless of the political regime and long before the creation of central banks over the past 700 years. So Exhibit 16, the decline in real interest rates has been a long-term trend. You see a number of different things there. The world nominal rate, GDP weighted, world nominal rate arithmetically weighted, percentage, linear, both GDP weighted and arithmetically weighted as well. They all show a very similar trend, which is since 1314, this has been trending steadily downward. And again, extending this out, it's not long before it crosses the zero line. Before we go any further with this, I just put up a new graphic. Let me just check in with the chat real quick, see if people are following this, or if there's... glad we made it through the audio being choppy. Yeah, something about, I think the browser locked up, but... Ted Reese did have some wacky takes on COVID a year ago. I missed that. Like I said, I just sort of came up on this guy recently. I mean, whatever the takes on COVID were a year ago, probably unforgivable. Nevertheless, we're looking at the economic stuff today, but good to know. Thank you. Gravel Institute. I'm not really sure what that comment is at. Is it literally Gravel Institute ? I don't know if he's with the Gravel Institute. Can somebody look that up? All right, let's continue with the thread. We're about halfway through. Interest is a form of profit. Similarly, many studies confirm Marx's law of a progressive fall in the rate of profit. E.g., Esteban Maito estimates that the world ROP fell secularly from 43% in the 1870s to 17% in the 2000s, again, ever closer to zero. GDP growth rates in high-income countries are also trending secularly towards zero, having been around 6% in the 1960s and mostly below 2% since 2000. So this is, again, GDP growth rate falling steadily. There's like a slight uptick between 2005 and 2010, but there's like the 2008 huge crash there. But the overall trend for the past 60 years has been a downward one. And again, the previous chart, core countries' rate of profit, current trend lines in selected years. So we started around 40%. Now we're down at around 12%, and that was as of 2010. So again, dropping. What is the future of the system? It's headed for chaos and breakdown. Again, that doesn't imply anything in terms of automatic results for us, but there may be moments of weakness coming up that we should be able to exploit and not be caught unprepared for. So continuing, the same is true of labor productivity growth rates despite massive gains absolutely, particularly because of exponential leaps in computing power. So here we see trends in labor productivity growth. Germany, Japan, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and United States of America, so 4 countries there, 1955 to 2018. And you see the labor productivity on the whole going down, Germany going up slightly, but the overall trend, if you average it out, is starting somewhere around, it's different for different countries, but anywhere from 6 to 7% all the way down to basically all the lines converge around 0.5% or 0.2%. Of the roughly 750 currencies that have existed since 1700, fewer than 20% remain. That's interesting. I didn't know that. So it used to be 750 currencies. So when we talk about early capitalism versus late capitalism and the tendency of capital to become conglomerated and to consolidate into fewer and fewer hands, we're going to see more examples of that in these charts. But this is certainly true. Capital tends to consolidate over time until you're just dealing with like a handful of companies and eventually just 1 or 2 companies that control everything. So, of the roughly 750 currencies that have existed since 1700, fewer than 20% remain. In 2011, British pound sterling had lost more than 99.5% of its purchasing power since its adoption as official currency in 1694. In 2018, the US dollar had lost more than 96% of its purchasing power since 1913, having barely lost any in the previous 140 years. The vast percentage of that figure, 91%, came after 1949, when the US usurped the UK as number 1 imperialist superpower. The figure since 1970 is 85%. 93.5% for the UK, when capitalism entered its first major post-World War II recession and computing power gains began to impact production exponentially. Come on. A few more panes left. Between 1964 and 2014, the average lifespan of S&P 500 companies shrank from around 60 to 18 years. There's a link there to hbr.org, The Art of Corporate Endurance. And, you think about that today, where people who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s now, gone are the days of like, you just find some big corporation to hold your hand from cradle to grave. Companies don't last as long as they used to. They last less than a third of their previous lifespan. So 18 years is, you need at least 2 of those to get through your prime working life. Probably more like 3 or 4. So, this is the world that we're dealing with today. Maybe not 4. All right. Depends if they're on the shorter end, I guess. Production costs and consumer commodity prices have trended secularly towards zero, since commodities tend to become cheaper the faster and more abundantly they're produced. For example, whereas the fastest supercomputer in 1975 cost $5 million, or $32 million in 2013's money, the price of a 2010 iPhone 4 with the equivalent performance costs $400. So you're literally looking at $400 versus $32 million just 35 years later. So billions of dollars to sequence the first human genome is now below $100 by 2017. 1 gigabyte of computer data storage fell from $200,000 in 1980 to 3 cents in 2014. In 2000, the cost of producing 1 kilogram of one type of molecule through precision fermentation cost $1 million. In 2020, the cost had fallen to $100 and was on course to become cost competitive with bulk animal protein, which stood at around $10 per kilogram for casein and whey by 2025. So that is 3 years from now. So that's super interesting, by the way. We'll continue with that a little bit. I hadn't actually heard of this. But precision fermentation, I guess, is a process where they can, through just, biochemical processes, fermentation, basically, create equivalent proteins to what you would get from keeping a large, herd of cattle around and milking them. Of course, keeping them in terrible conditions. Factory farming is absolutely awful. Animals live terrible lives and don't support it. But anyway, now they can do the same thing with precision fermentation because the technology has advanced to where you can make literally animal milk. Like you can make cow milk without the cows. That's fascinating. Anyway, when a company like Nestle switches to PF milk, which is motivated to cheapen its outlay to re-widen profit margins, the already highly automated and extraordinarily dependent on public subsidies conventional farming industry will become uncompetitive. Because think of how resource intensive it is to, all the overhead you need to house the cattle, all that kind of stuff, safety, cleanliness, disinfection, all that stuff. Well, you can just ferment it in some tanks. The average energy return on investment, EROI, on fossil fuel has fallen from above 100 to 1. In other words, you get 100 units of energy for every one that you invest trying to obtain that before the 1930s, and it's now fallen to 3 to 6 to 1 in 2019. So you have to spend a lot more energy to get the same amount of energy. So, that's a huge ratio. Like 100 to 3 is 33-fold. 100 to 6, obviously half of that, but still a lot. So, it used to be you could expend just a little bit of energy and get 100 units of energy. Now you can expend that same amount of energy and only get 3 to 6 units of energy back. So, and there's a link to it. Science Daily article, fossil fuels increasingly offer a poor return on energy investment. Indeed, in April 2020, the price of U.S. oil fell below zero for the first time ever. The global fossil fuel industry is already highly dependent on public subsidies, $16 billion a day, according to the IMF, and artificial scarcity that raises prices above what they should be by 70 to 80%. So you got public subsidies, artificial scarcity. The same thing applies to milk that we were just talking about because they dump milk regularly to keep prices high. So artificial scarcity there too, and public subsidies. Also, you want something interesting, look at corn. So Michael Pollan wrote a book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. Not all of it's gold, but he goes into a lot about corn there and how it's highly subsidized and then transformed chemically into all kinds of different widely used products. So they made a video about that in part, or at least partly based off of that book called Food Incorporated. Anyway, the value of, actually before we get to that, there's a link there supporting the thing. Revealed oil sector's staggering $3 billion a day profits for the last 50 years. And again, remember, this is highly dependent on public subsidies to the tune of $16 billion a day. And then artificial scarcity, where they're just keeping prices artificially high. So the value of Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure is expected to fall from $2 billion to minus $800 billion later this decade. That's quite a fall in value. Let's read that again. The value of Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure is expected to fall from $2 billion to minus $800 billion later this decade. So this, something similar, not exactly this, but a similar devaluation occurred at the beginning of the pandemic. For a while, they were selling, the price of oil was negative. They're actually paying people to take oil off their hands because the cost of storing it was higher than the cost of paying somebody to get rid of it. So how many more periods of this will we see? They will probably get more and more intense every time this cycle comes around. Fossil fuel has been vital for capitalism since the intensity of its production, combined with its non-renewability, have been key to raising the rate of productivity, the number of commodities per worker hour, and exploitation, the amount of time capital appropriates from labor. According to Sid Smith, all forms of energy production are becoming unprofitable. So again, one thing we know about capitalism is when things aren't profitable, capitalists don't do them. Which then we will go through a period of things just not getting done and people's needs not being met until some new system emerges on a not-for-profit, non-capitalist basis to do it. Now, the capitalists are still going to try to prevent that from arising. So we still need Marxism-Leninism. We need our parties. We need to organize for revolution, etc. But this is what's coming. All right, so part 2, and this part is much shorter, on the necessity of state monopoly socialism. Since capital accumulation depends on increasing monopolization/globalization and state and public subsidies, including tax cuts, a therefore global and state publicly owned final merger is becoming an economic necessity. And so you have a chart here indicating this is the trend capitalism goes in over time. So it starts in 1990. On the left side of the chart, you can see all these different banks and financial institutions, which now are only 4 institutions as of 2009. So it's merging and merging and merging and merging. And these banks then finance many other things in turn. And so the dependency is closely interwoven. And so, as the comment here said, again, since capital accumulation depends on increasing monopolization and globalization and state and public subsidies, including tax cuts, a therefore global and state publicly owned final merger is becoming an economic necessity. So this is like, when we talk about too big to fail and stuff like that, it's the point where they just don't let these companies crash because it's giant portions of the economy. They're interconnected to a point where this isn't just 20 firms are competing and 3 of them crashed. Oh well. It's literally the whole economy is riding on the survival of this. So we're I don't like Zizek very much, but Zizek made the point of like whatever stage we're in, we're already seemingly beginning to move into something new because of this whole too big to fail, the bailouts, all this stuff. It does seem to be a new system emerging. Now, it's still owned by the same people, so we have to bring class back into this because it's, okay, well, all the corporations merged. Is it socialism now? No, definitely not. Because, what still is key here is a capitalist class and a proletariat, a propertyless. Do you own Citigroup? No, of course not. That's still owned and controlled by the tiny group of parasitical capitalists that control, the economy and the political system which governs the economy and all this stuff. And increasingly, these things, you look at who funds the Democrats, who funds the Republicans, it's largely the same. So increasingly, bourgeois politics becomes this dog and pony show, the illusion of choice. As in reality, the economic and industrial operations are merged to an incredible extent where there really is, there's a chart, I wish I had it, that shows food manufacturing and who owns, whether you're eating Fruit Loops or you're eating like the organic granola, it's probably owned by the same company because in food production, this is definitely the case. You have companies like Archer Daniels Midland, ADM, and other, Monsanto, like it's enormously consolidated. And somebody must have it out there, the chart of food brands and how consolidated it's become. So then you get into this thing where as the capitalist system goes through boom and bust, there are no longer competitors. It's just one or two people, and they just merge into one company. Then what happens? Well, it still remains for us to abolish this system of ownership, this system of property relations, where the one or two companies that own and control everything. Why are we tolerating a system where a tiny group of owners dictates everything that happens and gets all the profits and all that? So that still needs to be abolished through a movement for revolutionary socialism. But this is what we're going into, and capitalism has just never been in this stage before. All right, continuing. Since private enterprises are increasingly dependent on long-term central planning, eliminated internal markets, efficiency drives, stock coding, etc., long-term central planning of the global economy as a whole is becoming an economic necessity. So I'd say yes and no to this. It's maybe one of the weaker statements in there. Lenin pointed out that the more consolidated capital gets, it's doing multi-year plans and things like that. I think that they're just highlighting that. But, don't get the wrong idea from this, that big corporations equal socialism. That's not the case. Anyway, since the workforce is now almost entirely services-based, as opposed to manufacturing, at least in the U.S., economic stability can only be established with an applicable system whereby for-profit commodity production is replaced by break-even utility production. Since money is becoming worthless, again dying a natural death, it must be replaced by non-transferable vouchers, canceled once spent like train tickets, pegged to labor time but weighted according to productivity rates, supply and demand. So again, he's getting more into his theories here. There's a link to grossmanite.medium.com, an article, Fiat Currency is Dying a Natural Death, Its Logical Replacement is a Digital Voucher. Again, are capitalists going to do this, though, is the question. No, they're going to hold out for the end of their system and for profiting off of it and for continuing class exploitation forever. That's what they want. They want indefinite rule. But this is a new moment that socialists need to take note of and organize against. So it concludes with plant the seed and expose people to this information. Make sure that they read it. It's going to take time to sink in, but in the end it will. And this is the last post. To be clear, I didn't say that capitalism would die peacefully without proletarian organization and revolution. A violent death is still a natural death. What I'm saying is it hasn't been killable before getting extremely old and senile. There's a retweet there of another. All death is natural, however it plays out. This is a bit of, fudging the meaning of words, because usually when people differentiate natural versus, not a natural death, it means dead versus killed. It is the case with modes of production that they are killed by revolution. But, so maybe just don't say natural death. I think what he's trying to say is that capitalism is coming to the end of the lifespan where it becomes increasingly difficult for capitalists to hold on to the system. But it still doesn't die on its own, is the point that we would, maybe request some rephrasing here. So anyway, he says all death is natural, however it plays out. I think that's kind of mealy-mouthed. But whatever has to be explained is why capitalism is becoming overthrowable in a way that evidently hasn't been the case in the past. Without that info, people are less likely to organize, convert, etc. So I get the point there, which is that, it's been often stated that capitalism has been most likely to be abolished in the areas where it's weakest. So for example, Russia during World War I, on the cusp of feudalism and capitalism. Capitalism was still very weak. Feudalism was dying, but capitalism was still very weak. And also the imperialist war to boot, well, they got a revolution. Then, also China at the end of the Qing dynasty, and there was a capitalist faction as well. They fought with each other, sometimes the communists versus the nationalists. And then World War II, helped to put, create a destabilization where revolution was possible. In fact, in the wake of World War II, we saw many revolutions in Eastern Europe, it took a little bit longer, but in Vietnam, in Korea, etc. So, capitalism does tend to be defeated, abolished, where it is weakest. So I think that the case being made here, and I can basically get on board with, unless somebody has some really good counter argument, is that there is a huge period of weakness of capitalism coming up, and socialists need to step up our efforts for agitation, education, and organization to take advantage of that. It will become much easier to abolish capitalism, which is not to say easy, than it maybe was in the 90s or something like that, where having these conversations was like nearly impossible. That was the time when I started learning about Marxism, and like the mantra was like communism is dead. So I was like, but wait, this makes sense. But with the destruction of the USSR, it was like, no, communism, end of history, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, finishing this off, the other point is to show the necessity of, quote, state monopoly socialism in terms of the evolutionary process at play, that you cannot leap over evolutionary phases into full communism or whatever. Without this info, people are more likely to make damaging mistakes, deviations, etc. So again, I think people would probably nitpick that rightly or wrongly. I'm more likely to give that a charitable read. Obviously, we don't make the Kautskyite mistake of, capitalism will just have a natural evolution into socialism peacefully, and the like, or Bernstein or something. We're not going to make that mistake, and I think that Reese is coming dangerously close to using that kind of language. Even though I did read other threads where he was, demonstrating that the evolutionary theory is wrong. But I think he needs to stick to clearer terminology here, lest people get the wrong idea, if indeed that isn't the idea that he's pushing. So anyway, but I think that what he's saying here, as far as the necessity of socialism, is it's still something that we need to make happen. It's not going to happen on its own. But the necessity of it, in that capitalism is approaching that final merger. There's nowhere left for capitalism to go. And then when you start going through boom and bust within that final merger system, we're going to have chaos, the likes of which it's just going to be, hell on earth, even beyond what we've already experienced so far from the horrors of capitalism. But yeah, it's time to finally be done with this system. I got to wrap up, but let's just check in with the chat real quick. I'm curious to hear people's ideas on this. And like I said, I'm throwing this out there. I found this reasonably well thought out, analysis. And I think that there is a lot of food for thought here as far as continuing that discussion. So let's begin continuing it now, and we'll also continue it on the YouTube later. As part of socialism's unpopularity, or apparent unpopularity, I think it would be more popular than it is if people understood what it actually is, due to our pointing out coming catastrophes of capitalist crisis like war and starvation. No, I don't think that's why it's not popular. I think it's unpopular to the extent that it is unpopular. Like, acceptance of socialism has been increasing in poll after poll. Now, people might not all agree on what socialism means. Marxists don't even agree on what socialism means exactly. But no, it's becoming more and more popular. So, never mind the boomers. Here's Marx. Here's the Marxists. But yeah. So anyway, I would dispute that framing a little bit. And no, I don't think it's due to pointing out coming catastrophes. I think if anything, that's making. I think, I remember for me in the 2000s, like reading about peak oil and becoming more interested in what do we do. I think of climate emergency protesters and the hate that they receive. Yeah, but that's a knee-jerk reaction. People who think past it, and those are obviously the people that we need to reach, they do are more likely to wind up doing something productive. I hear conspiracy theorists describing how globalists are planning to crash the dollar. Yeah, so that's something that really needs to be pushed back on, that it's not just merely a plan like, oh no, the globalist conspiracy has infiltrated the otherwise decent capitalist system and they're going to crash the whole system because they're the children of Satan or whatever. Okay, we need to push back on that. What we need to say is that class struggle and class contradiction is the driving force of history. Capitalism inherently contains these crashes. I mean, that was kind of the work of Grossman we were just reading about, is that capitalism inherently has these crashes, and that it has a tendency over time to increase all this stuff. And we need to point out it's the system itself. It's a feature, not a bug. So it's not like the globalist conspiracy. Continuing the comment, liberals deny the problem and fascists blame anyone and anything but capital. We're the only ones shooting straight with people. Yeah, and we need to keep it up. So yeah, I mean, I agree. We need to keep it up, and I've just given some examples of what to push back on and why. Obviously, there are others, but yeah, there's other competing narratives, in other words, but that's some of the example. I'll see if I have many criticisms of Richard Wolff, very many pointed criticisms. See if I can dig up that 2008 lecture because, and just to review, it's been a long time since I've seen it. But that was like an effort. I'll give him some credit. He was trying to point out like capitalism is the crisis. In fact, that may have been the title of the lecture. Something like that does need to be our message. And then, of course, we have to explain to people how you organize to abolish If capitalism is the crisis, well, how do you get rid of it? Well, that's where the next step comes, and it's not going to happen through fucking co-ops and the kind of shit that Richard Wolff is talking about, as we've covered in recent live streams. Again, this is where, like, Wolff head-on attacked the idea of forming the party, all of the Marxist-Leninist communist stuff, and he's pushing more of like an anarchist line. And absolutely we need to fight that. But as far as capitalism being the crisis, that's definitely accurate. An energy per capita graph would be an interesting addition. We can make jet fuel from seawater, just need a lot of energy. I'm not familiar with that. Yeah, it's still those that own the means of production against those that don't, no matter the level of conglomeration and consolidation. We are moving into terminal. And I think that this is summarizing some of the comments. We're summarizing the Reese's presentation based on Grossman's work. We are moving into terminal late-stage capitalism as energy becomes increasingly expensive to produce. The global dissipate system we built on top of cheap energy is thrashing. We start to slide down the Seneca cliff due to leaving the realm of political control. This is getting a little weird for me, but yeah, I mean, part of it is the system as we have known it. It's no longer as profitable as it was. That system was based on a set of material conditions and economic organization which no longer exists. I mean, this has always been the thing about capitalism. It creates the conditions for its own abolition. And I think this is just, making that case with a particular set of charts. All right. That is it for today. So we've hit the end of the chat. I think that was a pretty good stream. Thank you to the 43 people who are in the chat and who have contributed to this discussion. I appreciate you being here. You helped to make this what it is. We'll be streaming again this week. I'm not sure if tomorrow or not, but definitely again before the end of the week. But yeah, thank you for being here. We had a relatively troll-free conversation. I think there's only one troll. So yeah, thanks again.